All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the fourth annual Yellowstone Conference, New Dimensions of Care. This is panel number 3, Looking Beyond Behavior. And today we're going to be looking at behavior as a form of communication and kind of those underlying meanings of behavior, both from kind of a clinical and a personal perspective today. And we're going to try to share some information about what that behavior means, what it can kind of tell us, and how we as a community can be kind of looking at those pieces and trying to create positive change for the youth that we serve and the folks that are kind of with us in communities. Just as a point of introduction, my name is Tyson Schumacher. I'm the Chief Information Officer here at Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch. I'm not a clinician by trade. I came to mental health kind of by accident, sort of stumbled into it about 13 years ago. And from a personal perspective, I kind of worked in technology and consulting. So the idea of working with humans and behaviors was pretty foreign to me initially, as I always kind of wanted to fix symptoms. There's something that's broken and you just kind of fix it. It doesn't really work the same way with humans. So this topic is particularly kind of personal to me. And I brought along 4 folks today that I'm going to introduce you to that are kind of experts in this area, both with personal experience and professional experience. And I'm going to let those folks introduce themselves as well as kind of give their perception of this topic. So I'm going to start with Susan Frew.
Hey, hi, making sure you can hear me. My name is Susan Frew. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor here in Billings. I have worked, just a quick background, you can obviously read that, but I worked at Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch for about 9 years. And for the last 4 years, I've been doing some private practice here in Billings. And so just to kind of talk a little bit on my thoughts, beyond behavior, if I'm thinking about that. In my private practice, I work with kids and families and couples in all parts of Billings and their surrounding communities. Part of what I like to advocate for is I work from a very systemic perspective. And so what I mean by that is I like to see how things work together, because one of the things I hope we talk about here is how the one kid that's identified as the patient or the client isn't the one that's the only one hurting or needing help. It comes from a real systemic. So I think about the family, I think about schooling, I think about like an interdisciplinary team. So who else is working with that kid? We're all needing to work together. And so looking at that, I look at our system and how that's set up sometimes, especially in the world I'm in now in private practice, it's not as well set up to have that cohesiveness sometimes, and it's very disjointed if we as clinicians, practitioners don't make that effort. On top of that, I think as a larger system, if you look even broader, sometimes our system isn't even set up to help that systemic viewpoint. So I get into a lot of talks with insurance companies oftentimes because they don't cover family therapy or things of that nature when it's really necessary. When you're looking at a kid, you need to bring in the parents and sometimes the siblings, and sometimes you need to work on the couple dynamic because the kids are suffering because the relationship is suffering there. So really looking at it from a systemic perspective, and I think there's a lot of work that we can do as a community. And outside of Billings, I think there's a lot of work we can do just as a society to make that a better practice for those who are working with people.
Great. All right. Thanks, Susan. And Matt, you're next.
My name is Matt Strock. I am a father of a 14-year-old young lady who is obviously having some issues. She's had a couple stays at the Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch. I am a father, I'm a husband, I take care of my 2 kids, I fight very, very hard for her. Looking into the looking beyond behavior topic, I do that every day with my daughter. Some days are better than others. I've learned that I'm also a mechanic or a technician, so I come from the background of if something's broke, I want to fix it. That's been the hardest part for me, is not being able to fix what I see that is broken. I have now learned that some of the situations that happen with her are stuff beyond my control, stuff that I have to look at basically beyond the behavior to see, why is she doing this? Is there an answer to why she's doing this, and how can I help her through it? We're a very tight-knit family. Me and my wife have fight very, very strongly and very close knit with my daughter. My son too. I have a 20-year-old son who works very well with us. We've been doing counseling and therapy with her. She's doing much better. It's always, one day at a time and one step forward the best that we can. YBGR has been a great asset to us, especially living here in Billings and then being located in Billings. It's been great to work with them. I think they do an amazing job, and every day I kind of wonder, you know, how can I fix it when I see that it's broken, and we just take it one day at a time with her.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
All right. Linda, please.
Well, welcome. I'm Dr. Linda Filpula, and I am currently the superintendent of the Laurel School District. I'm starting my 30th year in education. I've had 10 years working at the secondary, middle school, and high school level. And I'm starting my 5th year as the superintendent. And I bring an educator's perspective to the conversation today. I remember when I first started teaching, the biggest issue I had in a classroom was, you know, one student with ADHD. Now I take a look at what our teachers and educators are facing. We have significant behavior problems, students that are coming into the schools with behavior problems that impede their learning and the learning of others. And educators are struggling with this, and I always remind them, we need to ask the question, why? Why is this happening? Why is this student behaving that way? And this is not a school issue. This is a community issue that will take a cohesive and collaborative approach to resolve and support our kids and our families. So that's the perspective that I bring today, is that it is going to take a village to help identify and address and improve our outcomes for kids.
Great, thanks.
Hi. Yeah. I'm Dr. Twilight Kirchen. I am an occupational therapist. For those of you that aren't familiar with occupational therapy, I'll define that in a little bit. I have been a practicing occupational therapist for the past almost 20 years, a little over 20 years. I am currently the founding director of the Occupational Therapy Doctorate Program at Rocky. We've been here several years. Our students are doing really wonderful things. We have a strong focus in mental health and dedication to providing services in this community. And we're looking forward to working with Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch very, very soon when we can put COVID behind us. So occupational therapy, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is really using a holistic therapeutic approach, helping individuals, children engage in meaningful occupations to promote independence and be as functional as possible. And sort of my connection with looking at behaviors today is to touch on sensory behaviors. We all have, know the 5 senses of touch, taste, smell, hearing, but there are others, vestibular and proprioceptive, which is like movement in space and awareness of body and balance. And most of us kind of adjust every day, and sometimes we're more alert and less alert, and we try to be in the just right place. A lot of our kiddos, they have a difficult time doing that, getting themselves in the just right place, and sometimes it presents as being behavioral in nature when we can really just adjust maybe the environment. Maybe it's the fluorescent lights that are bothering them. Maybe it's they're overstimulated by the number of people in the room. And if we can kind of make some of those modifications and adaptations to the environment, we can really help those kids self-regulate, be more functional, and not present with what may look like behavioral issues. So I just wanted to share, be able to share on the panel that how important it is to sort of look at that. And it looks the same, but no number of behavioral strategies will help a child that really is needing to self-regulate, and sort of what does that look like. So thank you. Thanks for letting me be here today.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to have just a quick run through on how folks will engage with us during the conference today to get some questions moving. So on the screen there, you'll notice that if you click on chat, it'll mention that it's disabled. There's a QA button when you move your mouse. You should see that at the bottom of the screen. From that QA button, you'll be able to put forward questions, but you'll also have a couple different options. You can send those questions in anonymously if you like by checking the anonymous piece there. You can also click on that little thumbs up, which will upvote comments. If you see a comment already in the list of questions that kind of fits what you were thinking that you kind of wanted to ask, you can go ahead and click that thumbs up and that'll kind of upvote it and make sure that we get that answered. As well as you can also comment on questions if there's an additional dimension that you wanted to add to the question or some additional questions or comments that you have there as well. So that is that piece. As well, we are offering CEU and OPI credits today. There'll be a survey for all the folks who are on the computer that comes up. You'll get an email for it afterwards as well. If you're joined by telephone, you can just email us at info@ybgr.org and you can request those credits there as well. We'll make sure we get those over to you. So go ahead and get your questions in, and I will start by asking a quick question. I'm actually just kind of curious from the panel's perspective how COVID has affected behaviors. I think it's been an interesting year for us. Lots of things have shifted. It certainly changed all of our lives in different ways. I find it challenging with people wearing masks to see some of those hidden communication pieces sometimes. But I'm curious from your perspective, panelists, what has COVID kind of done in your world, and what does that look like? Maybe Susan, you want to start us off there.
I think it's no surprise based on how the media has kind of pretty well summed up what COVID is doing mental health wise. I think at least for clinicians that I know in town, our job certainly didn't go on hiatus, even though it kind of did for a little while, but we're seeing a lot of increase in past clients needing and wanting to come back. That's been a huge increase, more so than past years, just with, I think, COVID and the stressors there and finding ways to deal with life. And so they're, I did have one client who said, well, now everybody sees what I go through. Like, this is my anxiety, like going out and going into the world, and like, you all understand now. When the COVID first hit. So for some of my clients, it was like, well, this is life. This is just what happens. This is my anxiety every day. And then for others, we've been, now that school is back in, that's certainly helped drastically for quite a few of our teenage clients, even our younger clients that we've seen. Our teenage clients were just needing that social connection more so than ever. And I have to say some of the adults needed it as well. But there's others that still struggle because their anxiety is so high. And so we're just seeing a lot of ebb and flow with what's going on in society and trying not to inundate themselves with news. That's been I feel like it's a talking point with everybody we work with right now. Don't have all these apps on your phone, easily accessible, looking at them full time. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd be curious, Twyla, from your perspective with the OT pieces, you talked about the environment that folks are in, and I think all of our environments have changed. We have a little bit less options for some of those things. Anything from your area on that topic with kind of helping people adapt to that change?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we have Rocky went online and we were teaching our students from a distance for a while, and now we're back in person again. And I think we've really talked about taking care of ourselves and making sure that you've got an environment that I know I've dimmed the lights in my office. I brought in a plant. I think surrounding yourself with things that make you feel good and feel comfortable, because we all have to be masked on campus, and unless you're in your office with the door closed. And so, that piece, and then just really engaging in those kind of behaviors that help you, like I said, self-regulate, getting enough sleep, eating right, finding ways to exercise, because gyms are closed now, right? So or people don't feel comfortable going. And so just, doing the things that you need to do to really help yourself stay healthy mentally, physically, and spiritually. spiritually.
Great, thanks. Anybody else want to add to that? Or we do have some questions coming in. I can also go that route.
I'll add something, Tyson.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Linda.
You know, for schools, we had at least 85% of our kids come back in person. I think that, you know, we can do the Zooms and we can interact, you know, this way because we have to. But that being in person, that social isolation is really challenging for kids and also adults. I have very serious concerns with our parents. They're trying to juggle, you know, do I have a job? Don't I have a job? Can I pay the bills? Oh, and now I have my kids at home. My husband's at home. We're all trying to get on and work from home, do school. I think there was a tremendous amount of pressure on our families. And so it is important, you know, that we all go back to school and try and manage the situation the best we can safely, because there is no replacement for being in person and face to face.
Okay. Maddie, you had something you wanted to add there too, right?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, from a dad's point of view and a daughter at the time that the COVID-19 stuff kicked in, she was actually enrolled. She was an inpatient at YBGR when everything kind of popped off. So we went from being able to see her once a week and doing, face-to-face counseling sessions with each other, which was wonderful, to not being able to see her anymore due to the campus being shut down. That's when YBGR decided to do the Zoom conferences and the Zoom meetings and stuff, which was amazing to be able to see my daughter. So the COVID-19 kind of, when she was in there, being, affecting our actually physically being able to see her was really hard. Once she got out, summertime was pretty good, but I do have to agree with Dr. Flip that, my daughter decided to go to school, be in person in school. She didn't want to be homeschooled. And basically just for the interaction, to be able to be there with the teachers, to be there with her peers, just the social isolation for her was really, really, really difficult. So I'm really glad that she decided to go to school and actually, have that interaction with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and from my perspective, having a technology background, it seemed great that everyone was going to go online. I wouldn't have to waste my time driving anywhere, seeing anybody. And after a few weeks, I was sort of desperate for human interaction. I remember across the FedEx guy on my way out of the house one day, and he waved at me, and I waved back. And I was like, oh, that was so nice. There was a person. I just had an interaction. We've got some great questions coming in, so I wanted to jump over to that. I'll start with this first one with the increased focus on testing and elimination of recess and breaks in learning time, especially for younger children. Is that detrimental for children? Is that causing an increase in behaviors having to change with all those structures and the pressure that comes from that? I think that's probably going to be a good question here for our for Dr. Filpula.
Yeah, it's important for kids to get out and move around and be involved in all of those activities. I can tell you in Laurel, we do have the recess. It looks different, but kids are still able to, again, interact and play. That's very important for the younger kids, that movement. We take mask breaks, even in the high school. I was over there yesterday, and the teacher said, let's go walk outside. Took high school kids out to take a little mask break, move around, and then go back in. So as much as we can get back to normal, whatever that new definition is, it's just important to continue to, just explain to kids the safety things, but then, they do need to be able to get out and to do things. And we all know that physical movement is good, even in a classroom. You have a 20-minute learning cycle. You should get up and move around. That's good for all of us.
Yeah.
Can I speak to that too a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
I too think it's super important. I mean, there's just the get up and moving around obviously is super important for little bodies. Even adults need that. We all do that naturally. Like I always talk about that. I get the luxury of deciding when to take my breaks, and kids are at the mercy of what adults tell them to do. That's where their peer interaction comes. It's those impromptu times that they actually learn how to interact with one another and engage. It's not in the highly structured testing, sitting in your desk 6 feet from somebody. It's those moments when they can just naturally learn how to be a team player or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and somebody did add a comment on here. Children learn a great deal through play and need playtime for open-ended parts of their education. I think that's pretty critical. Twyla and Matt, do you have any thoughts on that area? But
a group of our students, they have to complete research projects. And so they're helping a local school, one teacher in a second grade classroom with sensory strategies that she can interject into the day. And so she teaches about 10 of her kids in the morning in person. And then she has the rest of the class, about 8 kids that do virtual asynchronous. So not webinar type, but on their own, learning in the afternoon. And we've really been trying to help her figure out how to maximize the learning for both groups. And we're talking about building in movement breaks and making, they have 10-minute recesses is all, and working on ways that helping the kids transition, because they stay at their desks all day. They don't move around the classroom because they have to be social distanced. And how do you change, do you change the lighting? Do you do some aromatherapy? Do you do some things to help a transition, play a certain, song or whatever to help them mentally transition between math and writing? And she's really struggling in those areas. And we are concerned because the afternoon group, they have Zoom meetings and there aren't, the kids aren't coming to the meetings. So what happens then, with that learning when she has no ability to really hold them accountable. So that's a concern. But yeah, so those are some of the things that we're doing and involved in that I think are exciting.
Great. I've got another question here. I think it's a really great one. For someone who is not a professional or professionally trained, what are some basic and simple signs or clues that we can look to in our personal and professional lives in terms of maybe seeing irregular or unusual behaviors compared to what we typically see from the individuals around us? Who wants to start us off here?
It seems okay. So the question is really broad. Not gonna lie. So sorry if we don't answer this exactly, or maybe we can kind of brainstorm here, I guess. But I think irregular, unusual behaviors compared to what you typically see. I say that's really hard because in our world right now, a lot of this is unusual. And I think we're all acting a little differently. From my perspective, I know I get a little more hypersensitive in doing things and going places, and I wouldn't typically. So I think part of it is if we are all able to kind of checking in with ourselves, like what is feeling comfortable and where are we at, like checking in terms of our own anxiety, and am I isolating? Like, yeah, I totally am. Like I'm perfectly fine sometimes being a hermit in my house, and I haven't engaged with anyone outside of my family in days. And well, that's unusual. Like I need to kind of take a step forward, whether that's with a neighbor or if it's, getting my kids, to have a play date, like, oh, that might be more anxiety producing, in just our society right now. And so I think sometimes taking our own temperature of where we're at with kids, we have to help them do that. So when I say from a systemic perspective, that's where I want parents' engagement or caregivers or whoever that kid's with, because I want to teach them how to help take that temperature for that kid to help them figure out what do we need to do. Because kids don't naturally say this is what I need and I can go do that. So then I think about irregular, unusual behaviors for kids. Kids come in all walks and forms. They some people are very social, some are not. And so if we know those kids, it's really about that relationship. So I strive on that. The people who know this kid, is this irregular or unusual? Are they homebodies typically, or are they normally socially active? So some of the teenagers I've worked with, they're very into sports and they were all canceled last spring, or they're heavy into friends and now they can't see any of their friends because their parents say they can't. And then we start to see that they're getting depressed. And I'm like, yeah, we have to get you let's do a workout plan. Let's, your parents won't let you see kids. I get it. We're shut down. So let's develop different things that might be in their wheelhouse. And so it's kind of creating a thinking out of the box toolbox for where we're at a little bit. I don't know if that really answered the question or if you guys have other thoughts.
Yeah, to me, I see some of the intent of the question being kind of, looking for, oh, wait, hang on, we've got some more information. Oh, thank you. Just saying that helps. I think that the crux of what you're getting at, Susan, there's not a one size fits all kind of approach. And I think one of the questions that I would have for this level of expertise in the panel here is, are there some strategies out there that help you get that context or that story? We talk a lot in the data world about needing stories and data to kind of come up with things. How do you find that context to help people versus maybe just a simple behavior telling you that you have to look further in something? What are good strategies for that, maybe?
I think so the first question, what I would look for, occupational therapist maybe perspective would be, is the child or the person functional? Are they able to do what they need to do in the way that they need to do it? I mean, are they taking care of themselves? Are they, are they able to, either if they're, doing school from home or going into school, like, are they able to get there and get on, do what they need to do? And if there's a breakdown in their function or level of independence, and that would be a red flag. And I don't, Susie, you probably have a better idea, but looking at routines, I know for myself, I'm an introvert, so I was really excited to be home, like in lockdown. I thought it was going to be great. And after about a week and a half, I was losing my mind. And so those, like, developing those routines where you make yourself go walk around the block and you structure your day when the structure has fallen apart in other ways that you don't have control over, healthy habits and routines and that structure really can help put your life back together.
I agree with you, Twyla. I think one of the things I talked to even some people about, like even adults and kids, like when they were supposed to go to school, I was like, go for a walk. We all had that like transition to work. Typically that was a drive or, getting on a school bus, or they walk to school, like walk before that or walk at the end to like create some type of transition for yourself. You needed it.
Yeah.
So hopefully we answered their question. I don't know.
I think so. There's another question I think that actually adds some dimension to this as well. So I think maybe I'll throw that one out. We can kind of explore that world. We've got a couple of them that are kind of in the same vein, talking about how misbehaviors and needs go together. I think that's one of the challenges that we often have for our communities and treatment communities and educators and so on is not just looking at that behavior, but looking at needs. Maybe let's start with you, Dr. Filpula, talking about how do you see those behaviors in schools and how do you derive the need that's beneath them?
I'll kind of tie it into the previous question. How do you know if something is irregular or typical? And in schools, we're really looking for changes in behaviors. So it's really important that one of the first things all teachers do at the beginning of the year is, you need to get to know your kids. And every kid has their own baseline, their own how they interact. You have some kids that come in and they're always happy and others that are, more introverted, but that's their baseline. And so, kids have a range of behaviors, but when we start to see a sudden change or in behaviors, that's a red flag for us. And then we start getting into that why. Kids that are misbehaving. I was in middle school for the principal for 9 years. And, many talks with parents, some of that is normal adolescence, the defiance and that. There's a range there that's who they are at this point. They do really dumb things and you ask them and they're like, I don't know why I did that. And they honestly don't know why they did that. They just do, that's just who they are at that point. But then you get behaviors that are way out of the range. It's like, this is not typical even for like a middle school student. And then that's where you really need to start digging down into the why. Why is this happening? Why are they behaving that way? And really get a team of people. You need to involve the parents. Are they seeing this at home? Or is this just happening at school, or vice versa, or both? Or, oftentimes, we'll call home and, we're seeing some problems here. Yes, grandparent just died, or we're going through a divorce. That puts a whole new context and a lens on how we see the student. So I'm always, with the staff, it's like, don't make any assumptions. If there's a problem, you need to reach out, we need to communicate and get information on why this is happening. Then we can provide the proper supports to help kids.
Yeah, Matt, I'd be kind of curious about your perspective there as well, because somebody added a comment here as well about getting to know the behaviors at home, and parents are a wealth of information. That speaks to what Susan's talking about, and the kind of environment. You're the first line of defense in kind of seeing those behaviors. What does that look like? And then if you had advice to give folks on how to be part of that community, what would you say?
I would say the best thing that me and my wife have done, my daughter has a lot of anxiety. She is diagnosed with a little bit of a mood dysregulation disorder. So the statement of irregular and unusual behavior is kind of her motto. Sometimes we can go from 0 to 100 in half a second. It happens here at home. It happens at school. We have been very, very lucky with all of our school people that have been working very well together between the counseling, the Delta rooms, all that kind of stuff. So being very involved with me and Stacy, with Alana here at the house, and also being very involved in school. I call the school regularly and touch base with her teachers, with her counselor, with the vice principal. It takes a village, especially with the young person like my daughter, to help her through what she's got going on. And sometimes, the irregular, unusual behaviors, sometimes it seems like a normal day, and we have a great day and everything is all wonderful and everything seems fine. And the next morning, she tells us what happened. She tells us maybe if she did something, what's going on in her little mind. And so it's really hard for us, at least with our young lady, to tell, because sometimes it can be absolutely normal. And then we come to find out, that normal day was not normal. So we just stay really involved. We've done our best here in town to work with, she just started occupational therapy. She's been seeing a therapist now for quite some time. We're going to be talking to another lady who does hooks up the little little electrodes on the head and does kind of like the brainwave type stuff. So we're trying as many tools as we can with her to help her. Again, with the occupational therapy stuff, we've learned a lot with lights, texture, color, sound, different stuff like that. So we're hoping that's going to help her out in the future.
Can I add on to this? I always say like the interventions, because I wanted some practical examples too, I think, in that question. And I always say, like, sometimes almost thinking of the opposite of what that kid is doing. So the kid's yelling at me, like they're not feeling heard. So I need to shut up. Like, I just need to be quiet and listen and hear and validate. And so I'm not coming back for the attack. I'm not challenging them in that moment. And so oftentimes I say, like, think about what's the opposite. Because kids aren't great at figuring out, excuse me, how to get their needs met in an effective way. And they often do the opposite of what they're wanting, just to get something. One of the examples, a thing my kid wouldn't go to bed. I always use this as an example. My kid just wouldn't go to sleep and I couldn't figure it out. Earlier bedtime, it was just all a mystery. And it just turns out, like, process of elimination, we just started fiddling with everything from blankets to bedtime to what we were doing before bedtime to everything. And it came down to, he's super hot. And so he goes to bed with an ice pack every night, and he is out within like 2 minutes of going to bed now. And I would never have guessed that, but you just kind of start process of elimination for that kid. And somebody said getting to know the parents, and the parents oftentimes, we know best, and there's no answer that's silly. It's all workable.
Thanks, Susan. It brings up a couple of things, and I'll go into our next question here shortly. But one of the things that brought up for me was we worked with some OT folks a while back with a kiddo we were having some difficulty with, and the strategy was always trying to get him to be calm. And after the OT eval, we realized that his heart rate needs to be high. He's just, it's a burn off thing. So Tyler, I kind of wonder if you could maybe add some context to that about how OT can help you look differently at those behaviors. And I think OT folks bring up like a totally different perspective to that stage sometimes.
Yeah, we all we all have to sort of self-regulate, right? So there are times when we're really, you know, overly alert and aroused, and sometimes it's appropriate and it works. And other times when we're under aroused, like when we're getting ready to go to bed, we want to be, you know, low arousal so that we can go to sleep. But most of the time we're looking to be in the just right place. And when we're not, at the alert level that meets whatever the context is, we as adults, like sitting here, we're shifting, right? We're self-regulating, and we naturally do that. It's become automatic, but well, you know, many kids, they don't have that ability, right? And so when they need to self-calm, and maybe it depends, like some kids need a lot of sensory input. They might be what we call sensory seekers. So they need to run, they need to jump, they need to climb, you know, and that's how they kind of get themselves in the just right place to do whatever they need to do. And, you know, we have also the, you know, low arousal kids who are having a really tough, you know, they're laying on their desk, or they're, you know, they're really struggle to be alert and engaged, and that's sort of our challenge. But we have assessments that we use too that help us with that, as well as parent interview and looking at clinical officer, watching the kids interact in their environment. You know, those kids that are constantly running into things, they're seeking that input to help them get in the just right place so that they can meet the environmental demands. But when someone doesn't really understand that and they're watching, you know, well, Joey's like, you know, he's an issue, right? He's pushing the other kids, he's bumping into the other kids. He's a behavioral issue, right? When really what he's doing is trying to get input, to get himself in the just right place so he can respond to his environment in the way that works for him. And so it can be really misconstrued. And behavioral approaches, you know, time out, the things that we do when we see behavioral issues don't work with kiddos that need sensory approaches. And you can modify the environment, you know, either to make it more alerting or less alerting, what you're asking the child to do. And a lot of times, once you can help them be able to recognize that within themselves and advocate for their own needs, you know, it helps them be a lot more functional and a lot happier, and helps families. And so, yeah, the strategies are limitless as to what you can try, depending on, you know, if you've got someone who needs a lot of input versus someone who might be defensive, maybe overly stimulated very easily. And so, and that's really what OT does. Look at all of those things and figure out how best to meet that individual child's needs.
So I'd like to take that and ask this next question a little bit with some of those lenses. I think there's some great strategies that are being presented. With these increased behaviors in school-age children and districts managing that, and teachers who aren't, you know, mental health trained and dealing with a lot of those issues and co-occurring pieces, how do we help our community from burning out? How do we keep our teachers from burning out? And how do you address those needs with an individual kid when you have a group of kids and every kid is kind of different? How do you deal with that in that situation? And I'm going to attach another question to that at the same time, with kids being online and in person. So you've got that dynamic, as well as multiple kids in a classroom, multiple needs to meet. How do you balance that? And how do we keep all these important people, our clinicians, our teachers, our therapists, our parents, everyone that's part of this community, how do we keep them from burning out? And maybe that's too big of a question to ask, but maybe I'll give everybody a second to think about that. But you know, what is
like me to start off?
Please.
To be real honest with you, it is like a day at a time, and it is one thing at a time. I mean, I talked a little bit before about, you know, parents burning out. Our teachers are struggling. It is much better at the beginning of the year now that we have people on a schedule. I think schedules and routines are important. We had teachers that were emailing at 11, 12, 1, 2 in the morning. I'm like, you know, that's not healthy. That's not healthy. And so basically you need to take it one thing at a time, and there is a lot of triage that's going around. It's a challenge with teachers having to do online and offline. That's getting better as we problem solve through things. You have families that can't get online. So, trying to navigate all of those. And it is a heavy load. I'm going to be real honest here. And I have big concerns with that. One of the things I think is getting more people involved and creating an understanding. This is a community-based issue. And so by not trying to do everything, by reaching out, and people need to say, I need help. It's partly why I get out into the buildings. What do you need? Sometimes we need to ask people what they need and then to try and provide the supports for them. And it's going to take everybody. It takes everybody communicating and sharing their stories, sharing what they need. The challenge is sometimes people don't know what they need. They just know something is wrong. And so I'm really trying to create open lines of communication. We're really trying to do that not only with our staff, but with our families. If you are struggling, please reach out to us. And then I'm constantly looking for resources to support teachers because, teachers are not mental health providers. That's not our background. Our background is on instruction and teaching, pedagogy. And so, we do have the CSCT teams in each of the schools. I brought that on probably 10, 15 years ago because I recognized our teachers don't have this background. So, reaching out and collaborating with different people that have different expertise, like this panel here today, I think is going to be really important as we move forward and educate people, on these topics and where they can get the help and the resources they need.
May I say something, Tyler?
Please.
I know from a parent's point of view, we have fought very hard to have my daughter enrolled in the IEP program, or fight really hard for an IEP, which, if I remember right, is the individual education program, working with educators as yourself and all types of different platforms. It's one day at a time, and it's great because we can't take it on all by ourselves. I don't expect I don't want to call it the normal, but the standard teacher to be able to help my daughter going through what she's going through, but being able to have her with the IEP. We've had her in the Delta program, which has worked out good. She does about half her classes in the Delta class, half her classes in the normal classes. And, it's just a one day at a time thing. And I know from my daughter, when she was at the Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch, having that routine that she had there every single day, whether it was waking up, going to school, showering, doing exactly what she needed to do, to try to mimic that routine here with school back in and weekends and everything like that has been a huge asset. But it's hard to create that routine, when it's just here at home. But I agree that the IEP thing for us, we fought very, very hard to get that. And I can't remember what comes before the IEP. It's like a 404 something or other. So having that and having the teachers be on board and the staff be on board to know that my kid needs a little bit more help, unfortunately, and we're all there to help her and keep her going and staying in contact with everybody. And I believe the IEP also gives us a chance to touch base with them. I think it's like once a quarter for an IEP meeting or just to see and assess what we need to do with her.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
I think sometimes too, we wait for people to ask. And oftentimes that's like the last ditch effort. Like that's oftentimes when we're so beyond needing help. And so if we can look for signs before that, I know a lot of school districts have like EAP programs, meaning like their teachers can go see counselors outside of the district and things like that. And we see a few teachers here, and a lot of our summer sessions with them have been about like strategizing for school. They are stressed and they knew it before. I mean, these people were obviously very proactive, and so not everybody is very proactive. So we might be looking at teachers who are stressed or their students aren't liking the class, and that might be a time to like reach out and say like, what can we do to help? Like, what is there, are the classes too big? Or not that you can take away students out of a classroom, but like, how can we mitigate some of these stressors that they're under because they're not counselors and they're not, you know, they have a job to do, and man, we're asking them to do a lot, you know, and there's a lot of disparity, and they see that in terms of like socioeconomic within our community. And that's a stressor for them because they want to provide not only the education, but they want to make sure this kid is taken care of. They have big hearts, and we don't want to see them burnt out. None of us do. I think that's where, like, from a systemic perspective, I think all of us on this panel could agree, like, we want to support them, but sometimes people don't know what to do. And so if as a community, we could say, like, here's what we're going to do for our teachers or educators, and how do we rally around them and help them? We can't help you teach a class, but if we need to, you know, if we need to do something, or, you know, give you a teacher, you know, like a teacher day to support you and congratulate all the success that they are doing.
Thanks, Susan. Additional comments of the question here. Somebody mentioning that they're an educator with a counseling degree, and even then it's tough sharing solution-focused pieces and kind of working with each other. I think that's a great point. There are often a lot of services out there available, but people don't typically know how to access them. So it takes somebody being very vocal about getting access to the services, or kind of helping out. So maybe that's one of the takeaways, is how do we build and enforce and reinforce our communities to make sure that people have access to that. As I think we had a great comment about getting there first, and recognizing it when it's early, before it develops into something that's much worse and requires more resources. Quite a few questions coming in here, so I'm just trying to manage these. This one's been on the panel here for a minute. When I think of beyond behavior, I think behavior has meaning. So when a youth disrupts class or manipulates, what does that mean? Attention seeking often has meaning. Everyone attention seeks, manipulates as part of survival. So for parents, educators, therapists, OT folks, when it comes to that kind of manipulation, you know, maybe you have an example of what that looks like, and how do we think differently about that, instead of just taking it for face value? How do we look underneath that a little bit when it comes to those manipulative behaviors?
I feel like I'm jumping in a lot, so I'm sorry. I talk a lot if you don't know me. I think a lot of that, I think it goes back to what Dr. Flip even said, was the why. Like, why is this happening? And again, I go back to my stance of, like, I have to take inventory of myself before I engage with this behavior, because oftentimes when a kid manipulates, as adults, we initially want to get mad, or we get angry or upset that we got the wool pulled over our eyes, or, you know, things like that, because we're embarrassed. So rather than taking that stance, like, put my feelings aside, put my stance aside, and recognize, like, what's going on here. And oftentimes we can figure it out. It takes sometimes more than myself. Like, if it's my kids, I need to ask my husband, like, I have no idea, I'm out of it. I work in this field. So even as a professional, like, when it comes to our own kids, when it comes to the students we're working with, we sometimes have these glasses on that might change the lens a little bit. And so we needed other person's perspective. So how do I approach that in my therapy? I try to give a different perspective for parents oftentimes. And sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. And that's okay, but we're here to figure this out. And so I always say there's no brainstorming that's wrong. We're just trying to figure this out, and what we're doing isn't working. So we need to figure out something different.
I would just add to that I think one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids is our time. And so when we have kids, being able to make the time, whether you're at home or, you know, in the school environment, and to listen to them, and to ask questions, open-ended questions, to try and get down to why they're behaving that way. But oftentimes in our busy lives, you know, teachers are busy in the classroom. It's sometimes hard for them. Parents are busy, but sometimes if you make the time, and here I'm listening, tell me what you need, and open that conversation, that's a good starting point. Because until we know why the kid is behaving that way, we're really just treating symptoms rather than the problem.
And I know from a parent standpoint, me and my wife, we check in with my daughter constantly, morning, noon, night. When she comes down to check in with us, when she's taking her phone downstairs or putting it on the charger, we check in with her. Just how are you doing? What's going on? How was your day? How was lunch? You know, what are you thinking? How's tomorrow look? So the biggest thing we do with her is give her our time. I think that has meant a lot to her. And just to let her know, you know, from our standpoint, you know, you're not alone. I'm here, mom's here, your brother's here, you know, you got a team behind you, you know, we're all rooting for you to get through this, you know, and to hopefully come through on the other side. And I think, you know, sometimes I check in with her and she says everything is fine. And other times you check in with her and it just opens up a floodgate and she's able to just really let some emotions out, or what's going on, or how she's feeling, or thoughts that have been kind of, you know, brewing around in her head and stuff like that. So taking the time just to sit down and ask her, how is she, and being interested in her and her day, I think makes a big difference.
That's great. Corey wrote in as well and mentioned there's a great book called From Fear to Love that helps change your view to look at behaviors as coming from a fear standpoint. So that was thrown out there as well. If anybody's maybe read that, I would want to comment on that. I'm not aware of that book, but another question coming in here. A couple education questions as well. Some of my clients, as a result of being home for school, have discovered deficits or holes in their education. They're frustrated their children are reacting behaviorally, having to kind of plug those holes. As that's being seen in mental health kiddos and in the population, is it more of a characteristic of mental health, or is it maybe just a characteristic of this point in time? Is education changing, I suppose, and is that pressure creating behaviors? Dr. Filpla, maybe you have a response to that.
Well, I would say in general, most kids, if they're not understanding something and they become frustrated, it often then converts into behavior, because it's better that I act out, be the class clown, rather than people think that I don't understand the material. And so, you know, in terms of, you know, are we seeing more of that? I think, again, that kind of goes down to the individual student and the situation. You know, just generally speaking, when kids become frustrated, it's not uncommon to see them acting out.
And maybe along those same lines, the creating meaningful connections for kiddos that are online, and what does that look like, and how have schools adapted to that hybrid approach?
You can create online classrooms that are very similar to the in-person environment. I've got a kindergarten teacher. We have one online teacher per grade level for the elementaries. And I was walking by the other day, the online kindergarten teacher's classroom. And if you had just walked by and did not know that there were not kids in the class, you wouldn't have known it. She's, you know, doing the sounds, the kids are saying it back through the screen. They have a daily check-in, you know, they have the conversations like they do in the class. It is possible to set up an online routine. I think the biggest key, one of my big pushes in our district, is that kids need to go to school 8 to 4 like they normally do. So we have, they go on and they go in and out of their classes as if they were going in and out of classes throughout the school day. So they are on a schedule just as if they were here on site. And I think that's really important, those structures, those routines, where you have activities at the beginning of the year. That was one of the major stressors for educators at the beginning of the year, worried about not starting school and having to start online. At least in the spring, we had relationships established with our kids. So we really wanted to get in person and get a few weeks of school before we had to go online. And I'm happy to say, you know, we've been in school 5+ weeks, and hopefully, you know, we'll continue this way. But, you know, establishing relationships, even though it's in an online format, you can and should be doing. That has to be the first thing you do. Learning is it's communication, it's relationships. You have to establish those relationships in order to learn.
I'm going to speak as a parent right now, if that's okay. I'm going to flip my role momentarily. My kids are doing remote right now. And so speaking just as a parent and watching my son's 4th grade class, it's just like a 4th grade class. They're on Zoom and she teaches a lesson, and then they turn off their microphones and stuff. And then they do the work. And then if they have a question, they turn on their microphone and ask the teacher just as if they were in class. And so it's really, I say streamlined, but there are pieces that she does actually a lot of social emotional stuff in the midst of her education. And I find that really impressive. Because today, like we talked about, like when he gets frustrated, he feels humiliated. So that's when he shuts down, because he gets frustrated with the work and then he's just embarrassed and doesn't want to do anything. Like, okay, but that came out from a lesson that she was teaching and he had to fill in, like, create a sentence. And so I think there's and I don't know all the ways. I wish I could say, like, here's what you do, but like she's doing this as a reading lesson and they have to write sentences. And so right there is something that the kids are able to connect with in that way. I think she did a great job. And yeah.
As we get to the last few minutes here, although Twila, I just let you go off mute. Maybe you had a comment you wanted to throw in.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment about the actual environment that the kids are learning in at home, and and how important it is, and we do have a variety of households, and some parents are able to support their children, i.e. put them in a room where there's not a TV, limit distractions, make sure wherever they're sitting is height appropriate, and that the learning environment at home is conducive to being able to learn in the best way possible. Unfortunately, not all of our families and our children are in those settings. So, I mean, that is something to think about as well. I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we're getting right to the end of this. I think this is one of those panels where we could probably keep talking maybe for the next 4 or 5 hours. But maybe what I'd like to do is, we had a question here about getting to the root need. Maybe we could have everybody just leave us with a comment from your perspective, either practically and historically or sort of theoretically. How do you get to that root behavior for the kids that you work with, for the communities that you deal with, and how do you look? What would be your I don't know, your main comment about seeing beyond behavior to kind of leave us with today? And I'll open that up to whomever wants to start.
I think I'll start on this one, if that's okay.
Please.
I know from a parent standpoint, I don't have the skills and the education that some of these folks on the panel have. So I look at the beyond behavior I work really hard to try to find the individuals, the professionals, the teams, the people that have the education and the knowledge to help us as a family and us as a parent to try to understand how and why things are happening, to maybe look beyond the behavior to help her with the behavior. So, we as a parents can only do so much, but without you professionals, both educators and therapists and everybody like that, it's a challenge. And I just hope that anybody who's going through that as a parent takes the time to do some research, ask some questions, just really dig into it and try to find those individuals within your community that can help you and hopefully give you the right tools and help your kid through it.
Thanks, man. Susan, final thoughts?
Okay. Final thoughts. I can't advocate enough that I think parents are the biggest piece to helping their kiddo. Like Matt was saying, he feels like he doesn't have the tools or the strategies, and that's totally fine, but he's the advocate. And so he's the one that's connecting with these people to figure out, and we're all going to brainstorm and we're going to work together. And I think when I think of a systemic perspective, I think of that whole team that Matt's working with. I hope that they're all working closely together and talking and trying to figure it out together. I think as a society, if we can get on board, and I think even bigger sometimes, like with how our society is so siloed, here's education and here's mental health and here's all these things, and we have CSCT and we have all these great things that intertwine, but sometimes it still gets a little disjointed. And how do we collectively work together? So to looking beyond behavior, I think there's no behavior that's too small. to look at.
Great, thanks. Twyla, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think just, stepping back away from the behavior in the moment, depending on if you're the parent or the teacher or whomever, and not taking it personally, but really taking a eagle's view look at what may be the root of what is happening with the child, looking at the environment to see what might be going on there, and taking all of that kind of observational information and trying to make changes that might actually help the child in a way that was unexpected.
I'll kind of piggyback after Twyla. I think it is important that you observe and then you try something. And you're going to have lots of failures, and that's okay. Then you know that didn't work. It's kind of like Susan's example, with her son going to bed. Kept trying different things, and who would have thought it was needed an ice pack to go to bed. So, from a practitioner's point of view, that's what we do. You think you might have an idea, then you take some type of intervention. Maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't, that's okay. There's still learning that takes place. Some of the greatest lessons we learn are from failures. And it's not really a failure. It's beginning again a little more intelligently. So, don't give up, stay with it. And Matt, from an educator's perspective, we always say that parents are a child's first teacher. You are the expert with your child, and we are the resources to help you figure that out.
Yes, ma'am. I completely agree. Thank you for everything that you do.
All right, thanks everybody. We are at a couple minutes after the hour here, so we're going to kind of shut this down. There will be an opportunity for a survey afterwards. There'll be some comment sections in there. If there's anything that you see from your perspective or anything you want to add to the conversation, go ahead and do that. We'll be sending some follow-ups after the conference, but we'd love to hear from our attendees about how we could continue to stay engaged in this topic and what we could kind of continue to do to work as a community. And I wanted to thank our panelists and everybody who works in this world, and our parents and our communities for helping us raise children. I think this panel's been a clear indicator that it takes communities of hardworking, dedicated, caring folks, and I think we've got a lot of those folks around us. So we're great. It's great to have that. So thanks everybody for your time. Thanks for joining us out there, and take care. Thank you.
Thank you.